I never thought rock bottom would feel so quiet. There were no loud crashes, no dramatic exits, just a slow, numbing unraveling of everything I thought I could count on. My name is David, and this is the story of how I lost everything I once held dear, only to find something I never knew I needed. It started with a phone call. I was in the middle of reviewing invoices for my construction company when my wife, Erin, called. Her voice was calm, eerily calm. She simply said, "I can't do this anymore, David. I've packed a few things. I'm staying with my sister." Click. No warning. No shouting. Just gone. I sat there frozen, my pen still in midair. For a moment, I told myself it was temporary. We'd been arguing more, sure, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. But as I walked into our bedroom that night and saw the half-empty closet, something inside me cracked. The next blow came 2 weeks later. My foreman burst into my office, pale-faced and sweating. "You need to come see this." I followed him out to the job site, where city inspectors were taping red notices to the framing of the new housing development we were working on. Violation of permit codes, 1 red. Immediate suspension of work. Apparently, one of our subcontractors had cut corners, and now the city was threatening to fine us into the ground. I barely made it home that night before my lawyer called. My biggest client was pulling out of our next project. Without that contract, payroll would bounce. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat on the edge of the bathtub, and stared at the peeling wallpaper. I was losing my wife, my business, and my sanity, and I didn't know how to stop it. In the days that followed, I tried to fix things. I begged Erin to come back. I argued with city officials, tried to make deals with clients, scrambled to find backup funds. Nothing worked. Doors didn't just close, they slammed. I remember slumping onto my office floor after another failed call, pressing my palms to my face and whispering, "Why, God? Why now? What did I do?" But I wasn't really looking for God. I hadn't talked to him in years, not really. Church was something I did on holidays. The Bible sat on a shelf collecting dust. I used to believe once. I even went on a mission trip in college. But life got busy, success got loud, and God got distant. Or maybe I did. A week later, I got the call I'd been dreading. My bank was freezing my business line of credit. "We're sorry, David, but your current liabilities exceed your assets." I hung up the phone and felt something break inside. I drove, aimlessly at first. I ended up at the edge of a lake outside the city. It was dusk, and the water was still. Too still. I stood at the edge for what felt like an hour, staring at my reflection, wondering if this would be the moment I just disappeared. But then a verse echoed in my mind. A verse I hadn't thought about in years, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Job 13 verse 15. I didn't know why it came to me then. Maybe it was a whisper from heaven. Maybe it was all that Sunday school finally resurfacing. But it struck me, Job had lost everything too. And somehow, he still believed. I dropped to my knees on the cold grass, tears sliding down my face. "God, I don't even know if you're still listening. But if you are, I need you. I can't hold this together anymore. Everything I built is gone. If you're real, if you still want me, please, show me." There was no thunder, no miracle. Just silence, and the strange feeling that maybe, just maybe, that silence wasn't empty this time. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with my Bible open on my chest. I didn't remember opening it. The pages had fallen to Psalm 34, and my eyes locked on verse 18, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I whispered those words out loud, slowly, as if trying to believe they applied to me. Crushed in spirit, that was exactly what I was. That day, I decided to stop running. Not that I had anywhere left to run to. My phone was silent. No clients, no workers, no messages from Aaron. But I had something I hadn't touched in years, time. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt compelled to go somewhere still, somewhere I could think. So I packed a small bag, drove to a cabin my dad had left me years ago. I hadn't been there since his funeral. The place smelled like dust and pine. There was no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just the sound of wind brushing through trees and the creak of old wood. I built a fire, sat on the floor, stared at the flames. I expected peace to come, but instead, I felt everything I'd been avoiding rise like smoke, memories of all my failures. The harsh things I said to Aaron when work had me stressed. The pride that made me ignore advice. The arrogance that I didn't need anyone, not even God. I stayed in that cabin for 4 days. On the second day, I broke down. I screamed into a pillow until I couldn't breathe. I walked circles around the property like a madman. I asked questions with no answers. Why didn't you stop me, God? Why now? Wasn't I doing enough? But slowly, my questions shifted. What if this is mercy? What if losing everything is the only way I could finally see? I picked up my journal, one I hadn't touched in years. I started writing again. Not just about my pain, but about memories, when I first believed in God, when Aaron and I prayed for our daughter before she was born, when I felt closest to him. I saw a pattern I'd never noticed. Every time I rose in my own strength, I drifted from God. Every time I broke, he whispered louder. I remembered the story of the prodigal son, how the father didn't chase his boy into rebellion, but waited with open arms for his return. And suddenly, I didn't feel forsaken, I felt pursued. Not by judgment, but by mercy. I whispered, God, I've been chasing everything but you, and it's all slipped through my fingers. If this wilderness is the only way back, then leave me here until I learn what I need to learn. That night, I fell asleep with tears drying on my face. I had no plan for the future, no 5-point comeback strategy, but I had the Bible next to me, open and alive. I read Matthew 6 verse 33 over and over again. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Maybe, just maybe, if I stopped building my kingdom, God would finally show me his. The next morning, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, but I felt lighter. I wasn't healed. Aaron hadn't come back. The business was still wrecked. But I wasn't afraid anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not by clients. Not by the world. But by the one who had never left. I went for a walk through the woods behind the cabin. The silence was no longer threatening. The wind in the trees felt like a song. I found myself praying, not with fancy words, but simple honesty. God, if I have to start from nothing with you, I'll take that over everything without you. I stayed 2 more days. On the final night, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back, but in a good way. I saw weakness, yes, but also hunger. A hunger I hadn't felt in years. For truth. For healing. For purpose that doesn't burn out. I packed my things, closed the cabin door, and whispered a final prayer. Don't let me forget this place. Don't let me forget what it took to bring me here. I came back to the city different. Not instantly healed, but emptied of ego. The noise felt louder, the traffic more chaotic, but I wasn't the same man who had driven away with clenched fists and a shattered heart. Something sacred had begun in that cabin, and I was determined not to lose it just because life got loud again. My apartment was still quiet. Erin hadn't called. But this time, instead of staring at the door waiting for her to walk back in, I knelt beside the couch and whispered, "God, if you want her back in my life, I'll wait. But even if you don't, I'm yours." The next few weeks were humbling. I sold my truck, let go of the office lease, downsized everything. Pride screamed in protest, but peace settled in like an old friend. I applied for small jobs, things I never imagined doing after running my own company. I cleaned houses, drove for deliveries, helped a guy lay bricks in exchange for groceries. And every night, I opened that same weathered Bible. It wasn't about checking a religious box anymore. It felt like breathing. One night, I sat in a local church I'd started attending, small, nothing flashy. Just wooden pews and raw worship. The pastor was preaching on 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, where God says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." I leaned back, eyes wet. That verse hit different when your whole life has collapsed. Because weakness wasn't just a word, it was my reflection. After service, I stayed behind and just sat there. A man walked over, gray-haired, soft voice. He introduced himself as Mark. Said he'd seen me around. Then he asked, "Mind if I pray for you?" I nodded. He placed a hand on my shoulder and prayed the kind of prayer that feels like it wasn't coming from him, but straight from God's lips. Lord, remind him that even when everything breaks, grace finds us first. That night, I journaled those words, "Grace finds you first." I'd always thought I had to climb my way back to God, earn His favor again. But what if it was the other way around? What if He had been chasing me all along, even while I was running? That realization changed everything. I started volunteering at the church. Nothing fancy, just setting up chairs, washing coffee cups, helping old folks to their cars. But with every small act, I felt pieces of me returning. Not the old version of me, but a quieter, humbler one. One that wasn't addicted to performance, success, or praise. One who could finally breathe. One Saturday, while serving, someone called my name. I turned, and there she was. Erin. She looked different, softer, like she'd been on her own journey. Her eyes welled up instantly. We just stood there, two people who had walked through fire, suddenly face to face. She said, "I've been watching. I heard from a friend you'd been coming here." I didn't know if I was ready, but I couldn't stay away anymore. We sat in the back pew and talked for hours. Not about blame. Not about the past. But about what God had been doing while we were apart. She had started counseling. Been attending a women's Bible group. God had been doing surgery on her heart too, quietly, steadily, faithfully. We didn't decide everything that night. But we prayed together for the first time in over a year. And it wasn't complicated. Just, "God, we're here. We're broken. But if you want this, we'll try again, your way this time." I walked her to her car, and as she drove away, I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you." Not because everything was fixed, but because I could finally see that what looked like devastation had been divine disruption. It had all been grace. 6 months passed. Slowly, intentionally, Erin and I began to rebuild, not a marriage based on old routines or unspoken expectations, but one rooted in humility, honesty, and God's leading. We both had scars, and neither of us pretended they'd disappeared. But now, we wore them like testimonies instead of shame. We started attending counseling, both individual and together. We cried more in those sessions than we ever did in years of marriage. And somewhere in the middle of all that healing, I realized something. God never wanted my perfection. He wanted my surrender. I remember one night, Erin and I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. She held my hand and said, "I'm not afraid anymore, not of you falling, not of things failing again. Because even if it all burns down tomorrow, I know where to go now." I nodded. Because I knew too. I'd lost my business, my status, my plans. But I'd gained a compass. One that always points back to Jesus. A door opened not long after. A nonprofit that helped former inmates rebuild their lives needed someone to teach basic skills, communication, budgeting, work ethic. Nothing fancy. But it lit something in me. These men weren't impressed by flashy resumes or smooth speeches. They saw right through it. What they needed was raw, real, redeemed. And I had that now. I started mentoring 3 days a week. Then 5. Before long, I found myself telling them my story. Not the polished version, but the wilderness, the breakdown, the guilt, the grace. And their eyes would lock onto mine like they were listening to their future selves speak hope back to them. One day, after a session, one of the guys, tough, tattooed, quiet, pulled me aside and said, "Man, you should have been a preacher." I laughed. "I'm not qualified." He shrugged. Neither were half the people God used. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed louder than they should have. So I opened my Bible, randomly, and landed on Joel 2 verse 25, "I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten." And something broke again inside me, this time, not in grief, but in awe. God wasn't just giving me new days. He was redeeming old ones. Now, I stand on this side of the fire and I can tell you, yes, I lost everything the world said mattered. But what the fire couldn't burn was the foundation God had been quietly laying beneath my striving. He didn't just save my marriage or my mind, He saved my soul from a life of chasing things that never loved me back. I once thought faith meant getting everything right. Now I know faith means trusting God when everything goes wrong, and still saying, "You are good." I'm not the man I was. I don't want to be. That man had plans, but no peace. Ambition, but no anchor. Now, I have both feet planted on a rock that doesn't move. And the storms? They still come. But now, I know who holds the boat. So let me ask you, what's the storm that God used to bring you back? What did the fire burn away, and what did it leave that was holy? Share your testimony below. You never know who needs to hear it. If this story stirred your heart, don't leave quietly, like this video, share it with someone going through a dark night, and subscribe to the channel for more real, raw, and redemptive stories like this. God isn't finished with your story. Sometimes, losing everything is how He finally gives you Himself.